Last time, we met Clara Whitfield, a woman who came west to outrun a scandal that was never truly hers. She took a bookkeeping post in Redstone, Colorado, kept her past locked tight, and tried to disappear into the quiet rhythms of a frontier town. Then a journalist named Garrett Peel arrived and threatened to unravel everything she had rebuilt. It was Daniel Holt, rancher, landowner, man of very few words, who stood between her and the ruin. He wired Philadelphia. He read the court record. He stood before the town council and spoke the truth on her behalf without being asked. Clara stayed in Redstone. And on a Thursday evening in late autumn, as Daniel walked her home under a canyon sky gone gold, she said yes to seeing the ranch. What she didn't know, what no one in Redstone knew fully, was that Daniel Holt had come west to bury something too. There is a particular kind of man who is most honest in silence, who builds things, fences, barns, reputations, because building is easier than speaking, who keeps his past in a locked room inside himself and tells no one where the key is. Daniel Holt was that kind of man. And Clara Whitfield, who had spent the better part of 2 years hiding her own locked room, was about to find his. The Holt Ranch sat 4 miles east of Redstone, where the canyon widened and the land flattened into good grazing country. Daniel rode out ahead to have the place in order. Clara came by hired buggy on a Saturday morning in early December, the air sharp and clean, frost still on the fence posts. It was larger than she had imagined. The main house was solidly built, not grand, but deliberate. Every board fitted carefully, every window level. It was the house of a man who had taken his time and done the thing properly, which she was beginning to understand was how Daniel Holt approached most things. He met her at the gate. He had made coffee. There was also, on the kitchen table, a plate of biscuits that he admitted freely had been brought over by his nearest neighbor, Mrs. Garza, because his own attempts that morning had been, in his words, not fit for the horses. Clara laughed. It was the first time she had laughed easily without measuring it first, and longer than she could pin down. He showed her the property the way a man shows something he is proud of, but will not say so directly. The barn, with its careful organization, the paddock where 3 horses moved in the cold morning light, the eastern field that he was planning to expand in the spring. He spoke about the land with a quiet authority that came from knowing every acre of it personally. "How long have you been here?" Clara asked, as they stood at the edge of the eastern field, looking out at the canyon walls beyond. 8 years, he said. "And before Redstone?" A pause. Not long. But she noticed it the way she had learned to notice the small hesitations in people, having spent so much of her own life managing them. "Kansas," he said, briefly. "And before that, Virginia." "Virginia," she repeated. She waited to see if he would add anything. He did not. He suggested they go back inside for the coffee before it went cold. And Clara, who knew better than anyone what it meant to not yet be ready to say a thing, let it go. The answer came 3 weeks later, and it did not come from Daniel. A deed transfer arrived at the land office routine paperwork from a property attorney in Richmond, Virginia, finalizing the last of an estate settlement. Clara processed it without particular attention until she reached the name of the transferring party. Daniel James Holt, formerly of Richmond, Virginia. Widower. She read the word twice. Widower. She set the document down carefully. She finished the rest of the morning's work with full attention and did not allow herself to think about it again until she was back in her room above the milliner's shop that evening. Sitting at the window with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. He had been married. He had lost someone. And in 8 years in Redstone, he had told no one, or if he had, the news had never traveled to Clara's ears, which in a town this size meant he had told no one. She understood the impulse completely. She also understood that she could not unknow what she now knew, and that the next Thursday would require her to decide what to do with it. Thursday came. Daniel arrived at the land office at his usual time, reviewed his usual filings, and had just picked up his hat to leave when Clara said, without looking up from her ledger, "A deed transfer came through from Richmond. I processed it this morning." The silence was different from his usual ones. Fuller. "I see," he said. "You don't have to tell me anything," she said, still not looking up. "I processed the document. That's all. It goes no further." She heard him set his hat back down on the chair. She heard him sit. Her name was Margaret, he said. We married in 1871. She died in 1875. Fever. It took her in 11 days. Clara looked up then. His face was composed the way she had learned to recognize composure as something a person builds rather than something they simply have. I stayed in Richmond 2 years after, he continued. Everything there had her shape in it. The house, the streets, even the way the light came through in the mornings. He paused. A man can only grieve inside a shape for so long before he has to find open ground. So you came west, Clara said. I came west, he said. Found this land. Built the house. Worked until the working was enough. And then? He looked at her quietly. And then a woman arrived on the afternoon stage with a leather trunk and a very straight spine. And I found that the working was no longer quite as sufficient as it had been. Clara felt the warmth of it move through her, before she could decide what to do with it. She looked back at her ledger. Her handwriting, she noticed, had gotten slightly uneven on the last line. I'm sorry about Margaret, she said. She sounds like she was loved well. She was, Daniel said. And then, after a moment, you've never asked me why I went to the trouble with the council. The wire to Philadelphia. I assumed I knew, Clara said carefully. And what did you assume? She set down her pen. That you are a man who does what's right. That it didn't require more reason than that. That's part of it, he said. The other part is that I know what it is to have something taken from you that you didn't deserve to lose. Margaret didn't deserve the fever. You didn't deserve what your husband did to your name. He turned his hat in his hands once, twice. I suppose I recognized the shape of it. The office was very quiet. Outside, the December wind moved down the main street and rattled the sign above the general store. We are quite a pair, Clara said at last. Both of us carrying things we came out here to set down. Maybe that's not the worst foundation, Daniel said. For whatever this is. Clara considered that. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, the first of the season, drifting past the window in slow, unhurried flakes. No, she agreed. I don't suppose it is. That evening, Daniel asked Clara to dinner. Not at the land office. Not on a Thursday walk home. A proper dinner at the hotel dining room on the corner of Main and 2nd, which was the closest thing Redstone had to a formal restaurant and which served a beef stew that the whole town agreed was worth the price. Clara wore her best dress, dark blue wool, fitted at the waist, the collar she had repaired herself after the journey west. She was ready before he knocked. She made herself wait a full minute before she opened the door, because she was a woman who had survived considerable difficulty, and she would not be undone by nervousness over a beef stew dinner. Daniel had trimmed his beard. He had also, she noticed, polished his boots to a standard she had not previously witnessed. He said nothing about her dress. He simply looked at her in the way he had, steady and unhurried, and offered his arm. The dining room was half full. Several people looked up when they entered. A few looked longer than was polite. Clara met every gaze evenly and sat down across from Daniel Holt with the same straight spine she had arrived in Redstone with, except that tonight it did not cost her anything. They talked through dinner the way they had been learning to talk, easily, honestly, without the careful management that both of them had grown accustomed to in the company of other people. He told her about Margaret's garden in Richmond, which had grown tomatoes so large and red they looked implausible. She told him about her sister back east, the one who had written every week after the trial, whose letters she had been too ashamed to answer until recently. You should write back, Daniel said. I know, Clara said. I think I'm almost ready to. He nodded, and she understood that he understood that being almost ready was not a small thing. That it was, in fact, a significant distance traveled from not ready at all. Walking home through the first snow of the season, their breath visible in the cold night air, Daniel said, I'd like to do this again. The stew was very good, Clara agreed. He laughed low and genuine, and she decided it was one of the better sounds she had heard in a long while. At the door of the milliner's shop, he stopped and faced her. The snow was falling softly between them, the lantern on the corner making everything amber and quiet. "Clara," he said, "I'm glad you stayed." She looked at him, at this careful, unhurried man who had read a court record and wired Philadelphia and polished his boots and laughed genuinely and understood, without needing it explained, what almost ready meant. "So am I," she said. "I'm very glad I stayed." They had both come west carrying the weight of what they had lost. Standing in the soft December snow outside a milliner's shop in Redstone, Colorado, neither of them was thinking about the weight anymore. Clara came west to bury her past. Daniel came west to survive his. And somewhere between a Thursday ledger and a December snowfall, they found something neither of them had thought to look for. But Redstone is not finished with them yet. Next episode, a letter arrives from Philadelphia. And it is not from Clara's sister. Subscribe to the Western Chronicle so you don't miss what comes next. A new story or the next chapter every single week.